The air inside the small church on the outskirts of New York smelled of lilies and damp wood, a faint perfume that clung to my throat as I stood before the altar. The stained glass windows cast fractured beams of red and gold across the empty pews, painting the scene in a glow that felt more like a funeral than a wedding. My hands trembled beneath the thin fabric of my simple white dress, a gown that hugged me too tightly, as if it were a shackle rather than silk. I didn't choose it. I didn't choose any of this. James Pham stood beside me, tall and imposing, his dark suit pressed to perfection. His face was a mask, sharp cheekbones, a jawline carved from stone, and eyes that held no warmth, only a glint of something unreadable. He slipped a cold gold band onto my finger, his touch mechanical, like a businessman sealing a deal. And that's exactly what this was. A transaction. I'd agreed to marry him, a stranger, a millionaire CEO, to save my brother Tommy from the, loan sharks who'd been circling him like vultures. The priest's voice droned on, words about love and eternity that felt hollow in this silent, sacred space. I barely heard them. My mind was elsewhere, back in that dingy apartment last night, where Tommy had begged me to save him. "Anna, you're my last hope," he'd sobbed, his voice cracking as he knelt on the stained carpet, his rumpled shirt soaked with sweat. His hands clutched his head, fingers digging into his messy black hair. I'd knelt beside him, my heart breaking as I smoothed the collar of his shirt, a futile gesture to fix something, anything, in the chaos of his life. "I'll figure it out," I'd promised, my voice steady even as my chest tightened with dread. He was all I had left after Mom and Dad died, the only piece of family I could still hold on to. And now, standing here, I was paying the price for that promise. The priest stopped speaking, and the silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. James turned to me, his gaze locking onto mine. "You stay, and your brother lives," he said, his voice low and firm, a command wrapped in velvet. It wasn't a vow of love, it was a contract. My stomach churned, a mix of rage and helplessness, swirling inside me. I wanted to rip the ring off, to scream that I wasn't his to buy, but the image of Tommy's tear-streaked face held me back. I squared my shoulders, meeting his stare with my own. "I don't belong to you no matter how much you pay," I replied, my voice trembling but sharp, cutting through the stillness like a blade. He didn't flinch. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement of my defiance. The priest cleared his throat, pronouncing us husband and wife. And just like that, it was done. No applause, no music, just the faint whistle of wind slipping through the cracked church door. I turned away from James, staring at the flickering candles on the altar, their flames dancing as if mocking my trapped soul. What had I done? I'd traded my freedom for Tommy's life, but at what cost? My dignity? My dreams? The sketches of furniture designs I'd once poured my heart into, now gathering dust in a drawer, felt like a lifetime ago. I remembered the nights I'd spent sketching, curved chairs, sleek tables, dreaming of a future where I could build something beautiful, something mine. That Anna was gone now, replaced by this woman in white, bound to a man I despised. James didn't know that Anna, he didn't know me at all. To him, I was a means to an end, a pawn in whatever game he was playing. And yet, as I stood there, the weight of the ring pressing into my skin, I couldn't shake the question. Why me? Why had he chosen me for this cold, calculated bargain? The church doors creaked open behind us, and a gust of chilly air swept in, rustling my dress. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. James stepped closer, his presence looming, and I felt the heat of his breath against my ear. "You don't have to like me," he murmured, his tone softer now, almost human. "But you'll see this through." My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. See it through? As if I had a choice. Tommy's life hung in the balance, and I'd tethered myself to this stranger to keep him safe. But for how long? How long could I live as a shadow, a prisoner in a gilded cage. I thought of Tommy again, his boyish grin when we were kids, the way he alongside him as he stumbled into the apartment last night, desperate and broken. I'd always been the strong one, the one who held us together after our parents were gone. I couldn't fail him now. But standing here, in this church, I felt the weight of that strength cracking. I wasn't a hero. I was a woman drowning in fear and regret, and the man beside me was no savior. He was my jailer. The ceremony ended, and James offered his arm, a formality I couldn't refuse. I took it, my fingers brushing his sleeve, and felt nothing but the chill of his control. As we stepped toward the door, the stained glass light faded behind us, and I wondered if this was my life now. A world of shadows, where honor meant sacrifice, and love was just a word lost in the wind. I didn't know James, didn't trust him. But one thing was clear. This marriage wasn't a beginning. It was a sentence, and yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and the fear, a flicker of something stirred. Defiance, maybe, or hope. I'd made this choice for Tommy, for family. That had to mean something, didn't it? The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, revealing the penthouse on the 50th floor of James Pham's world, a kingdom of glass and steel overlooking a restless New York night. I stepped out, still in that suffocating wedding dress, the hem brushing the polished hardwood floor. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, neon lights pulsing like a heartbeat against the darkness. It was beautiful, in a cold, untouchable way, much like the man who owned it. The air smelled faintly of coffee, sharp and bitter, drifting from an unseen kitchen. I stood by the window, arms crossed, staring down at the streets below, feeling miles away from the life I'd known. James sat on a sleek gray sofa across the room, legs crossed, a bottle of red wine in one hand, and 2 empty glasses on the table before him. He poured with a practiced ease, the liquid glinting like blood under the dim recessed lights. "You don't have to stand there all night," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something I couldn't place. Indifference, maybe, or curiosity. I didn't move. The dress clung to me, a reminder of the vow I'd made hours ago, a vow that wasn't mine. My fingers itched to tear it off, to shed this new skin I'd been forced into, but instead, I turned to face him. "What do you want? From me?" I asked, my tone flat, masking the storm brewing inside. He leaned back, glass in hand, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided to solve. "What did you want before you came here?" He countered, his dark eyes narrowing. Slightly, the question caught me off guard, slicing through the armor I'd built. Before this? Before Tommy's debts? Before the loan sharks? Before this gilded cage? I saw them then, my old sketches, scattered across the chipped table in my tiny apartment. Curved armchairs, minimalist tables, designs I'd poured my soul into, dreaming of a day I'd see them come to life. That Anna felt like a ghost now, buried under the weight of this moment. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The memory stung too much, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing it. He took a sip of wine, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. It wasn't a request. I hesitated, then crossed the room, sinking into the plush leather, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The coffee scent grew stronger, mingling with the faint musk of his cologne. Up close, I noticed the lines etched into his face, faint scars on his knuckles, a hardness in his jaw that spoke of battles I didn't know. "I wasn't always this," he said suddenly, his voice dropping low, almost confessional. "I built everything I have from nothing. No family, no handouts. Just these." He held up his hands, turning them so I could see the faded scars crisscrossing his skin. "My parents walked out when I was 12. I worked in a warehouse, hauling crates until my hands bled just to eat." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, lost in some shadow I couldn't see. No one stayed. Not then, not ever. His words hung between us, heavy and unexpected. I didn't want to care. I didn't want to feel the tug of pity, or was it recognition that stirred in my chest? I'd lost my parents too, not to abandonment, but to a car accident when I was 19. Tommy and I had clung to each other ever since, two orphans, trying to survive. But James didn't know that. He didn't know me, just like I didn't know him. And yet, here he was, peeling back a layer of himself, offering it like a truce. Why? I shifted in my seat, the dress rustling against the leather. "You don't have to tell me this," I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. "I'm not here to be your friend." His lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a flicker of amusement. "Good," he replied. "I don't need friends. But you're here now, Anna. You don't have to stay forever, just until the debt's cleared." His words were a lifeline and a chain all at once, and I hated how they made me feel. Trapped, yet oddly seen. I reached into my small purse, fingers brushing against the folded edge of an old sketch I'd kept, a sleek bookshelf design, one of my favorites. I didn't pull it out, didn't dare let him see, but touching it grounded me. That was me. The real me, not this woman in white playing a role. "I had a life," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I had dreams, and you took them away." The accusation landed hard, and for a moment, his mask slipped. His eyes softened, just a fraction before the steel returned. "I didn't take them," he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Your brother did. I'm just the one cleaning up the mess." The truth in his words cut deeper than I expected. Tommy's gambling, his desperation, it had dragged me here. But James wasn't innocent. He'd seized the opportunity, turned my brother's weakness into his leverage. I glared at him, my nails digging into my palms. "You're no savior," I snapped. "You're a vulture, picking at what's left." He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just watched me, his silence louder than any rebuttal. The neon lights outside flickered, casting shifting shadows across his face, and I wondered what else he was hiding behind that calm exterior. Why had he chosen me? Why not just pay off the debt and walk away? There was more to this, more to him, but I wasn't ready to ask. Not yet. I stood, needing distance, and walked back to the window. The city sprawled below, alive and indifferent. Tommy was out there somewhere, safe for now because of me. That had to be enough. But as I stood there, James's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't have to stay forever." And I clung to it, a fragile thread of hope in this prison of glass. Maybe I could endure this. Maybe I could find a way back to myself. But first, I had to survive him. The chandelier in the grand ballroom glittered like a constellation trapped in crystal, casting shards of light across the marble floor. I stood in the midst of it all, a stranger in a sea of tuxedos and sequins, the crimson gown James had chosen clinging to me like a second skin. The fabric shimmered with every step, heavy and elegant, but it felt wrong, foreign, like I'd slipped into someone else's life. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of voices, a symphony of wealth I didn't belong to. James had insisted I come, his voice clipped over breakfast. "You're my wife now. People need to see you." So here I was, a trophy on display, polished and poised for his world. I adjusted the neckline in a nearby mirror, my fingers brushing the cool silk, and caught a glimpse of my own reflection. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For a moment, I saw my mother staring back, her stern face softened by a rare smile as she'd once adjusted my shirt before a school play. "Don't let anyone look down on you, Anna," she'd said, her voice steady despite the chemo eating her away. I straightened, clinging to that memory, determined not to let this gown, or this man, define me. James stood across the room, a king in his domain, shaking hands with men in tailored suits and women dripping in diamonds. His presence commanded attention, his smile practiced and perfect. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when someone lingered too long. He caught my eye and nodded, a silent order to join him. I crossed the floor, heels clicking, each step a battle against the urge to turn and run. When I reached him, he slid an arm around my waist, his touch firm but not warm. "This is Anna, my wife," he announced to the group, his voice smooth as velvet. They smiled, murmured polite greetings, but their eyes judged me, curious, calculating, wondering what I'd done to land a man like him. I forced a smile, my lips stiff, until a silver-haired man in a pinstripe suit leaned in. "You're a lucky woman," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "James is quite the catch." The words ignited something in me, a spark of defiance I couldn't smother. I pulled away from James's grip, turning to face him, my voice cutting through the chatter. "I'm not his prize," I said, loud enough for the circle to hear. "I'm not here to decorate his arm or his life, so don't treat me like I am." The air stilled, heads turning, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. The man blinked, flustered, but I didn't care. I wasn't a doll to be dressed up and paraded. James's hand tightened briefly on my elbow, then released. He didn't speak, didn't scold me in front of them, but his eyes flickered, something like regret, or maybe surprise, softening the steel I'd come to expect. "Excuse us," he said to the group, guiding me toward a quieter corner near the bar. The bartender poured whiskey, the amber liquid glinting under the lights, and James took a glass, offering me one I refused. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "They don't matter." "Then why am I here?" I shot back, my hands trembling with the adrenaline of my outburst. "If they don't matter, why dress me up and drag me out like some showpiece?" I gestured to the gown, its weight pulling at my shoulders. "This isn't me. None of this is me." He sipped his drink, watching me over the rim, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set the glass down, the clink sharp against the polished wood. "Because I need them to believe this is real," he said, for now. His words hung there, cryptic and heavy, stirring more questions than they answered. Believe what was real? Our marriage? His power? Before I could press him, my phone buzzed in my clutch, a cheap, battered thing that clashed with this glittering world. I pulled it out, heart lurching at Tommy's name on the screen. "Anna, they're back," he whispered when I answered, his voice raw with panic. "The guys, they're outside my place again." My stomach dropped, the room spinning as I gripped the phone. "Stay there," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Lock the door. I'll fix this." I ended the call, turning to James, my breath shallow. "You said you paid them off. You said Tommy was safe." My words were a hiss, accusation laced with fear. He frowned, a rare crack in his composure, and pulled out his own phone, typing quickly. "I did," he said, his tone clipped. "They shouldn't be there." He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw something like concern. Or was it guilt? In his eyes. "I'll handle it. Handle it." 2 words that should have reassured me, but didn't. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he'd kept his end of this twisted bargain, but doubt gnawed at me. What if he'd lied? What if Tommy was still in danger because of me? I turned away, staring at the crowd, their laughter now a dull roar in my ears. This world of wealth and power. It was a facade, a shiny lie that couldn't protect what mattered most. Tommy was my anchor, my reason, and I'd sold myself to this man to save him. But had I? James stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You don't have to fight me on everything," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I'm not your enemy. I looked up at him, searching his face for the truth. Then who are you? I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer, just held my gaze, and in that silence I felt the first crack in the wall between us. A crack I wasn't ready to widen, but couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed again, a text from Tommy. They're gone. For now. Relief flooded me, but it was fleeting. I clutched the phone, my lifeline to the brother I'd do anything for, and wondered how long for now would last. The rain hammered against the windshield of James's sleek black car, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest. Streetlights blurred into streaks of gold and white as we sped through the wet New York night, the city a watercolor painting smeared by the storm. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, my hands gripping my phone, Tommy's panicked voice still, echoing in my ears. They're outside my place again. James drove in silence, his jaw tight, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping a rhythm against his thigh. The scent of leather and his faint cologne filled the space, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. I'd demanded he take me to Tommy after that call at the gala, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. You said he was safe. I'd hissed, and he'd nodded, his expression unreadable, before grabbing his keys. Now, as the wipers slashed through the downpour, I stared out the window, replaying his promise from that first night in the penthouse. Your brother lives. Had it been a lie? A half-truth? The thought twisted my stomach into knots. I'd traded my life for Tommy's. But if James couldn't keep his word, what was this all for? The car slowed as we pulled into a rundown part of the city, the kind of place where neon signs flickered and shadows lingered too long. Tommy's motel came into view, a squat, peeling building with a buzzing vacancy sign. James parked, the engine cutting off with a soft hum, and I was out the door before he could speak, my heels splashing through puddles. The rain soaked my gown, the crimson fabric clinging to my skin, but I didn't care. I pounded on Tommy's door, my voice raw. Tommy, it's me. Open up. The door creaked open, and there he was, my little brother, pale and trembling, his eyes wide with relief. Anna, he breathed, pulling me into a hug. I held him tight, feeling the sharp edges of his ribs through his thin shirt, the dampness of his hair against my cheek. I brushed the wet strands back, my fingers lingering as I murmured, You're okay now. But was he? I glanced over my shoulder at James, who stood a few feet away, rain dripping from his dark hair, his coat already speckled with water. Two men in leather jackets lingered near a beat-up truck across the lot, their eyes glinting under the motel's flickering lights. James approached them, his stride calm but purposeful, and I watched as he handed over a thick envelope. Words were exchanged, low, clipped, lost to the rain. But the men took the cash and left, their truck rumbling into the night. James turned back to me, his expression steady, as if he'd just signed a business deal. It's done, he said, wiping rain from his face. They won't come back. I ushered Tommy inside, shutting the door behind us. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew, the single bulb casting a weak glow over the chipped furniture. Tommy sank onto the sagging bed, his hands shaking. I thought they'd kill me this time, he whispered. I sat beside him, my wet dress soaking the sheets, and squeezed his shoulder. They're gone. You're safe. But my words felt hollow. Safe until when? I turned to James, who'd followed us in, leaning against the doorframe. You said you paid them off already. What happened? He crossed his arms, water dripping from his sleeves onto the floor. I did, he said, his voice low, measured. But some debts don't stay buried. They came back for more. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his armor, something raw, unguarded. He stepped closer, the dim light catching the scars on his knuckles. I had a sister once, he said, almost too quiet to hear. She was like Tommy, lost, tangled up in things she couldn't escape. I couldn't save her. She died because of debts I didn't pay fast enough. The confession hit me like a punch, stealing my breath. I stared at him, the rain outside softening to a steady patter, and saw not the cold CEO but a man haunted by ghosts. "So what?" I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. "You think marrying me makes up for that? You think I'm some stand-in for your guilt?" My hands clenched into fists, nails biting into my palms. "I'm not your redemption, James. I'm not here to fix your past." He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "You're right," he said, his tone steady but heavy. "You're not her. But I saw you with Tommy that first night, outside his place, in the rain, holding him up when he could barely stand. I knew then I couldn't let him end up like she did." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I paid the debt to keep him alive. The marriage, that was to keep you close, to make sure it stuck." My throat tightened, a storm of emotions crashing through me, rage, confusion, and something I couldn't name. He'd watched me? Before the deal? Before the church? The idea sent a shiver down my spine, but his words rang true in a way I couldn't dismiss. I thought of Tommy beside me, his shallow breaths, the way he'd leaned into my touch. James had saved him tonight, maybe before too. But at what cost to me? I stood, brushing past James to the door, needing air, needing space. The rain had slowed, leaving the night slick and quiet. "You don't get to use me to ease your conscience," I said, my voice breaking as I turned back to him. "I'm here for Tommy, not you." He nodded, just once, his face unreadable again. "I know," he said, "but I'll keep him safe. That's my promise." I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my wet skin, and looked back at Tommy through the open door. He was all I had left, my reason for this nightmare. James's promise lingered in my mind, a fragile thread I didn't want to trust, but couldn't quite cut. Not yet. The fluorescent glow of James's office felt like a spotlight, harsh and unforgiving as I stood in the middle of the chaos. Papers littered his desk, tabloid headlines screaming in bold black ink. "Millionaire CEO buys bride to settle debt. Anna Nguyen. Trophy or transaction." The words burned into my vision, each one a dagger twisting deeper into the fragile honor I'd clung to. The room smelled of fresh ink and stale coffee, a bitter mix that churned my stomach. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white, as the hum of the city filtered through the tinted windows high above Manhattan. James paced near the door, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low growl. "Find out who leaked this. Now." He hung up, tossing the phone onto a chair, and turned to me, his face a storm of frustration and something I couldn't place. Guilt, maybe. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said, running a hand through his damp hair, still tousled from last night's rain. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed off the glass walls. What wasn't? Me finding out you're a liar, or the world knowing I'm your pawn? His jaw tightened, but before he could answer, my phone rang, shrill and insistent. Tommy's name flashed on the screen, and my heart sank. I answered, my voice trembling. "Tommy, what's wrong?" His sobs crackled through the line, jagged and desperate. "Anna, they're outside again. Reporters, cameras. They're everywhere. They're calling me a junkie, saying I sold you to him. I can't take this." The line went dead, and I stared at the phone, my breath, shallow panic clawing at my chest. "Tommy," I whispered, then spun to James. "This is your fault. You said he'd be safe." I grabbed one of the tabloids, thrusting it at him. The photo splashed across the front showed me in that crimson gown from the gala, James's arm. Around me, with a caption that made my skin crawl, "Debt Bride, a love story or a lie." "Look at this!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "They're tearing him apart out there, and it's because of you. Your money, your deal. What's the point if it destroys him?" James took the paper, his eyes scanning it, then dropped it like it burned. "I didn't do this," he said, stepping closer, his voice low but fierce. "Someone else did." "Who?" I demanded, my hands shaking. "Who'd care enough to drag us through this?" He hesitated, and that pause was all I needed to know there was more he hadn't told me. "Lydia Tran," he said finally, his tone clipped. "She's an old rival. Used to be close, too close. I turned her down years ago, and she's hated me ever since." I stared at him, the name sinking in. Lydia Tran, a name I'd heard in whispers at the gala, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "So this is her revenge?" I asked, incredulous. "She's ruining my life. Tommy's life because you broke her heart?" "It's not that simple," he snapped, then softened, his shoulders slumping. "She wanted my company, my trust. When I cut her out, she swore she'd make me pay. This is her move." His words made sense, but they didn't ease the fire in my chest. I turned away, pacing to the window, the city below a blur of lights and shadows. Tommy was out there, drowning in this mess, and I was stuck here, powerless. My phone buzzed. Again, a text from him. "I'm sorry, Anna. I messed up worse than you know." My stomach dropped. Worse than I knew? The door burst open, and James's assistant rushed in, a tablet in hand. "Sir, you need to see this." She tapped the screen, and a video played. Tommy, pale and disheveled, standing outside that rundown motel, cameras flashing around him. "I worked for her," he said, his voice cracking as he faced the reporters. "Lydia Tran. She paid me to gamble, to rack up the debt. Said it'd trap Anna with James. I didn't know it'd go this far." The video cut off, and the room spun. I sank into a chair, my hands covering my face, the weight of his words crushing me. Tommy had betrayed me. Not just with his gambling, but with her, with Lydia. He'd been her pawn, luring me into this marriage, into this hell. I looked up at James, tears burning my eyes. "Did you know?" I whispered, my voice raw. "Did you know he was working for her?" He shook his head, stepping toward me, his face pale. "No. I swear, Anna. I thought it was just the debt. I didn't—" He stopped, running a hand over his mouth. "I didn't see this." I stood, shoving past him, needing air, needing to scream. "You didn't see?" I yelled, turning back. "You brought me into your world, your enemies, and now Tommy's out there breaking because of it. What's your excuse, James? That you're sorry?" He didn't answer, just watched me, his silence a wall I couldn't breach. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Tommy. "I'm running. Don't hate me." I clutched it, my lifeline, to him slipping away, and felt the room close in. I'd fought for him, sold myself for him, and he'd handed me to Lydia's trap. The betrayal cut deeper than any headline, any camera flash. But even now, I couldn't hate him. Not fully. He was still my brother, still the boy I'd promised to protect. I turned to James, my voice steady despite the tears. "Fix this," I said. "Not for me, for him." He nodded, his eyes dark with something like resolve. "I will," he said. "Whatever it takes." The city lights pulsed below, indifferent to my unraveling world. Tommy was gone, running from the mess he'd made, and I was left here, tied to a man I didn't trust, facing an enemy I didn't know. But I wouldn't. Break, not yet. For Tommy, I'd hold on. The penthouse felt like a fortress under siege, its glass walls trembling as the neon lights outside flickered erratically. I stood by the window, staring into the night, the city's glow fractured by the jagged edges of broken glass on the floor. The crash had come minutes ago. A brick hurled through the pane, wrapped in a note that read, Step down, or she pays. My heart pounded, the air thick with the smell of rain-soaked concrete drifting in from the breach. James knelt beside the debris, his face a mask of fury as he unfolded the paper, his scarred knuckles whitening around it. "They've crossed a line," he said, his voice low and dangerous, like the rumble of thunder before a storm. He stood, pulling out his phone, barking orders to someone. Security, police. I didn't care. All I could think of was Tommy, out there somewhere, running from the reporters, from Lydia, from me. His last text, "I'm running. Don't hate me," burned in my mind, a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I'd barely had time to process his betrayal when this happened, and now the danger felt closer, sharper, cutting into the fragile calm I'd tried to hold on to. Footsteps echoed from the hall, heavy and hurried, and the door burst open. 2 men in dark hoodies stormed in, their faces shadowed, one clutching a knife that glinted under the dim lights. My breath caught, and I stumbled back, my heels crunching glass. "Where's Fam?" The taller one snarled, his voice rough, eyes darting around. James stepped forward, placing himself between me and them, his stance steady despite the blood trickling from a cut on his hand. Shrapnel from the window, I realized. "You're in my house," he said, his tone ice cold. "Leave, or you won't walk out." They didn't listen. The shorter one lunged at me, his hand grabbing for my arm, but James moved faster, slamming into him with a force that sent them crashing into the sofa. The taller one swung the knife, and I screamed as the blade sliced through James's sleeve, blood blooming red against the white fabric. He grunted, twisting the man's wrist until the knife clattered to the floor, then drove his fist into the attacker's jaw. The man crumpled, but the other was back up, charging again. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the table, adrenaline surging, and swung it hard, cracking it against his shoulder. He staggered, and James finished him with a swift kick, sending him sprawling. The room fell silent, save for our ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens growing closer. James turned to me, his shirt torn, blood streaking down his arm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse, eyes searching mine. I nodded, my hands trembling as I dropped the lamp, its base dented and useless. My legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't look away from him, from the man who'd just risked himself for me. "You're bleeding," I said, my voice small, pointing to his arm. He glanced at it, then shrugged, wincing as he flexed his hand. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I crossed the room, grabbing a towel from the bar cart, and pressed it against the wound, my fingers brushing his skin. He flinched, but didn't pull away. And up close, I saw the sweat beading on his forehead, the strain in his eyes. "Sit," I said, guiding him to the sofa. He obeyed, a rare surrender, and I knelt beside him, wrapping the towel tighter, my hands steady despite the chaos in my chest. "Why'd they come here?" I asked, my voice shaking as I worked. "What does Lydia want?" He leaned back, exhaling heavily, his gaze fixed on the shattered window. "Me gone," he said. "My company, my life. She wants it all. You're just leverage." I froze, the towel slipping slightly. Leverage. The word stung, a reminder of how this had started. Me as a tool, a means to an end. But then he spoke. Again, softer, almost broken. "I didn't want this, Anna. I saw you that night with Tommy, holding him in the rain outside his place. You were fierce, unbreakable. I thought if I kept you close, I could save him. Save you both. Like I couldn't save her. Her. His sister." The confession from the motel night flooded back, and now it hit differently, heavier. I looked up, at him, the towel still pressed to his arm, and saw the truth in his eyes. Pain, regret, and something deeper. "I've loved you since then," he said, his voice barely a whisper, raw and unguarded. Not because of the deal. Not because of Lydia, because of you. The words crashed over me, a tidal wave I wasn't ready for. Love? From this man who'd bought me, controlled me? My mind screamed to reject it, to call it a lie, but my heart stuttered, caught by the way he looked at me, like I was more than a pawn, more than a debt. I pulled back, standing, my hands slick with his blood. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice cracking. Not now, not after everything. But even as I spoke, I felt the shift, the wall I'd built, trembling under the weight of his sacrifice. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, security finally, and voices filled the hall. But I barely heard them. James stood, swaying slightly, and reached for me, his hand hovering before dropping. You don't have to stay, he said, his breath ragged. Not after this. I stared at him, the blood-soaked towel at my feet, and something snapped inside me. Not anger, not fear, but a need I couldn't name. But I want to, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them, soft and certain. The guards burst in, shouting orders, but I didn't move. I stayed there, locked in his gaze, the night closing around us like a shroud. Tommy was still out there, Lydia was still a threat. But in that moment, James wasn't just my captor. He was the man who'd bled for me, and I couldn't unsee. In the motel room smelled of stale smoke and damp sheets, a faint haze clinging to the air as the single bulb flickered above Tommy's bed. I sat beside him, my hands busy with a spare shirt I'd found in his duffel bag, folding it over his thin frame as he slept. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his face pale and drawn, a shadow of the boy who'd once raced me down our old street. The bruises on his arms, new ones from running, hiding, stared back at me, a silent accusation. I brushed his hair back, my fingers trembling as I whispered, I've got you. But did I? After everything, I wasn't sure anymore. The door creaked open, and James stepped in, his arm bandaged now, a makeshift sling from the towel I'd tied last night. He carried a manila envelope, its edges worn, and his face was etched with exhaustion. Dark circles under his eyes, a cut on his cheek from the fight. He'd barely spoken since the attack, since those words he'd let slip in the penthouse. I've loved you since then. I hadn't responded, hadn't known how to, but they lingered, heavy and unyielding, like the rain that still pattered outside. He set the envelope on the rickety table, his voice low. It's done. The last of his debt. Every cent. They won't come for him again. I looked up, my hands pausing on Tommy's shirt. You're sure? I asked, my voice rough, worn thin by fear and doubt. He nodded, meeting my gaze. I tracked down the rest of Lydia's men, paid them off, shut them down. She's out of moves, for now. For now. The words hung there, a fragile promise, but it was something. Tommy stirred, his eyes fluttering, open, and he saw me first, then James. Anna? He mumbled, his voice cracked and small. I squeezed his hand, forcing a smile. I'm here. You're safe. He sat up slowly, wincing, and his gaze darted to James, guilt flooding his features. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Lydia, she paid me to lose to keep gambling. Said it'd get you close to him. I didn't know she'd... He choked, tears spilling down his cheeks, and I pulled him into my arms, his sobs shaking us both. I held him tight, my own eyes burning, but my anger from the revelation, his betrayal, still simmered beneath the surface. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, my voice trembling. I'd have fought for you anyway. He pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. I was scared. Scared you'd hate me, scared they'd kill me. I thought I could fix it, but I just made it worse. His words cut deep, a knife twisting, in the bond we'd always had. But I couldn't let go. Not of him, not of us. James stepped closer, his shadow falling over the bed. "You're not the first to fall into her traps," he said, his tone steady but softer than I'd ever heard. "She used me too once. Played on my pride, my need to prove myself. I cut her out, but not fast enough to save my sister." He paused, his jaw tightening, and I saw the weight of that loss in his eyes, the same weight I'd seen in the rain-soaked motel, the penthouse under attack. "I won't let it happen again," he added, looking at Tommy, then me. "Not to you." The room stilled, the flicker of the bulb the only sound. I stood, facing him, my heart a tangle of gratitude and resentment. "You should have told me," I said, my voice low but firm. "About Lydia, about Tommy, all of it. I deserved to know what I was walking into." He nodded, slow and deliberate, then sank to one knee before me, the envelope in his hands. "You're right," he said, his voice raw. "I was wrong to force you into this, to think I could control it. I'm sorry, Anna. Forgive me, or don't. But this is yours now. Freedom, if you want it." I stared at him, the man who'd bought me, bled for me, now kneeling like a penitent. The envelope held the end of Tommy's debt, the end of this nightmare. But it was more a confession, a plea. My fingers brushed the paper, hesitating, and I felt Tommy's hand on mine, small and shaky. "He's not lying," Tommy whispered. "He came for me last night after I ran, found me hiding in an alley, told them to back off. He didn't have to." The words sank in, heavy and true. I looked at James, his head bowed, blood still seeping through the bandage, and saw not the cold CEO but a man who'd fought. For me, for Tommy, for something he couldn't name until now. My throat tightened. Tears I'd held back spilling over. "Get up," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't need you on your knees." He rose, his eyes searching mine, and I took the envelope, clutching it to my chest. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said, "but I don't want to lose him, or you." Tommy reached for my other hand, and I grasped it, then extended my free one to James. He took it, his grip warm and firm, and for a moment, we stood there, 3 broken pieces, jagged but joined. The bulb flickered again, casting soft shadows over us, and I felt the first stirrings of something new. Not love, not yet, but a fragile trust, a chance to heal. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, washing the night clean. Tommy leaned against me, his breathing steadying, and James stayed close, silent but present. We weren't whole, not yet, but we were together. And for now, that was enough. The morning sun spilled over the penthouse balcony, painting the city, skyline in hues of gold and pink, a quiet promise after the storm. I leaned against the railing, the cool metal grounding me as a soft breeze tugged at my hair. In my hands, I held one of my old sketches, a sleek bookshelf design, its edges worn from years of being tucked away. The paper trembled slightly, not from the wind, but from the weight of what it meant, a piece of me I'd thought lost, now reclaimed. Below, New York hummed with its usual chaos, but up here, on the 50th floor, it felt like a new beginning. Tommy was gone. Not forever, but for now. Yesterday, I'd driven him to a rehab center an hour outside the city, a quiet place with green lawns and kind faces. He'd clung to me at the entrance, his eyes red but clear, and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Anna. I swear." I'd hugged him tight, smoothing his hair like I always did, and let him go, trusting he'd find his way back to himself. James had stood beside me, silent but steady, his presence a comfort I hadn't expected to lean on. He'd paid for it all. The program, the transport, without a word, and I hadn't fought him on it. Not this time. Now, he stepped onto the balcony, a mug of coffee in each hand, the steam curling into the crisp air. His arm was still bandaged, the sling gone, but he moved with a careful grace, the scars of that night etched into more than just his skin. He handed me a mug, the warmth seeping into my palms, and leaned against the railing beside me, close enough that I felt the heat of him through my sweater. "How's it feel?" he asked, nodding at the sketch. His voice was low, gentle, a far cry from the commanding tone I'd first heard in that church. I traced the lines of the bookshelf with my thumb, a smile tugging at my lips. "Like coming home," I said, the words slipping out before I could overthink them. He nodded, sipping his coffee, and we stood there in silence, watching the sun climb higher. The city sparkled below, a canvas of glass and steel, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel trapped by it. I felt free. Not because the debt was gone, not because Lydia's threats had faded, though James assured me she'd backed off, her leverage spent, but because I'd chosen this, chosen to stay. He set his mug down, turning to face me fully, his dark eyes searching mine. "You don't have to be here," he said, his tone serious, almost hesitant. "The deal's over. Tommy's safe. You could walk away, start over, anywhere." He gestured to the sketch, then the horizon. "You could build that life you dreamed of, Anna. I won't stop you." His words hung between us, a final offering, a door he'd opened wide. I could see it. Me in a small studio, drafting designs, free of him, free of this world. But the thought felt hollow, incomplete. I set my mug beside his, stepping closer, the sketch still in my hand. "I could," I said, my voice steady, "but I don't want to." His brow furrowed, surprise flickering across his face, and I pressed on before I lost my nerve. "I spent so long fighting you, hating you, thinking you were my cage. But you're not. You saved Tommy, more than once. You bled for me, stood between me and her. I didn't see it then, but I do now." I paused, my throat tightening, and lifted my eyes to his. "I once thought you were my enemy, James. But somewhere, along the way, you became my family." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the quiet. His expression softened, the hard lines of his face giving way to something raw, unguarded. "Anna," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't deserve that." He reached for my hand, then stopped, as if afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. I took his instead, my fingers lacing through his, feeling the roughness of his scars against my skin. "Maybe not," I said, a small smile breaking through. "But it's mine to give." He exhaled, a shaky breath, and pulled me gently into his arms. I let him, resting my head against his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart beneath. His shirt. It wasn't love, not the fairy tale kind, not yet. But it was trust, hard-earned and real. We stood there, wrapped in the dawn, and I felt the weight of the past lift, just a little. Tommy was healing, I was rebuilding, and James, he was here, not as my captor, but as my partner. Later that day, we sat in his office, not the cold, sterile space of that tabloid nightmare, but a smaller room, warm with wood and light. I spread my sketches across the table, and he listened as I talked about opening a studio, small, affordable designs for people like us, people who'd started with nothing. "I'll back it," he said, no hesitation. "Not as a deal, not as leverage, just because I believe in you." I smiled, and we planned, sketching a future together, one built on more than debts or danger. The sun climbed higher, bathing the balcony in golden light as I stepped out again, James beside me. I thought of Tommy, of the boy he'd been and the man he could become. I thought of my parents, gone but watching, maybe proud. And I thought of James, of the man who'd knelt for me, fought for me, loved me before I could see it. "We've freed each other," I said, my voice soft, the sketch fluttering in the breeze. He squeezed my hand, his grip a quiet vow, and we faced the dawn together, scarred, steady, and whole.